everyone, I am Dynah Basuil, a professor at AIM who teaches human capital management. I am also the executive director of the AIM Ramon V Rosario Center for Corporate Responsibility. It is one of the research centers of AIM wherein our advocacy includes gender and women in the workplace. I would like to welcome you to the first ever webinar initiated by the Asian Institute of Management, School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning in partnership with the Ramon V. Rosario Center for Corporate Responsibility and supported by UN Women and We Empower Asia. This webinar serves as our platform to continue our advocacy of promoting gender inclusivity in the workplace and among businesses, especially during this time when most of us are now working from home. Into gender inclusion in the workplace. When we look at our population here in the Philippines compared to our neighbors in the region, we are one of those countries that still has a growing population. When we break this population up by generations, we can see that the Generation Z is far more than the Generation Y, and the Generation Y is also more than the Generation X. And what this means is that pretty soon, majority of the people in the workplace will be composed of the younger people. And even more so now, when we have our enhanced community quarantine, I've been reading some information that if the people are not given access to their contraceptives, perhaps in another 9 months, we may see a mini boom in our population. Now, what does this mean is that if businesses want to grow, the growth of businesses will have to come from hiring women. Why? In the Philippines, we only have a 50% labor participation rate for women. And that means of those women who are of working age, only half of them are gainfully employed. And if you want to grow as a business, it's more cost efficient for you to hire those people who are still not employed as opposed to hiring from those who are already employed. And for the men, we already have an 80% labor participation rate. Also, in terms of having more diversity, gender-wise, say in management, then definitely because a lot of our management team are still very much male-dominated, then a lot of that diversity will have to come from hiring the women in the labor force. And from my research, what I have seen is that when we look at the commitment of the generations X and Generation Y, we actually see that the Generation X is slightly more committed than Generation Y. How do we actually measure organizational commitment? So we have statements here on top where we ask the respondents, how strongly do they agree or strongly disagree to these 3 statements? And based on that, we create a measure of their organizational commitment. Generation X males are slightly more committed than Generation X females, and the Generation Y again has lower commitment levels. However, when it comes to intent to turn over, so these are the questions again that we ask our respondents in order to measure their intent to turn over. So, for example, at the present time, I'm currently or actively searching for another job in a different company. So they decide how they strongly disagree or strongly agree with that statement. And what we can see is that the Generation X compared to the Generation Y is less likely to turn over. But if we turn our attention to the Generation Y, when we look at the gender makeup, we see that Generation Y women are just as committed compared to the men, but are less likely to turn over. And what this means is that if given the opportunity to work, Generation Y women compared to the Generation Y men are less likely to turn over. And how does flexible work arrangements come into the picture? For example, in this study that was shared with us by one of our partners, Investing in Women, an Australian aid initiative, they looked at the perceptions of 2000 Generation Y members and compared to the males from the Generation Y in the Philippines. Majority of them, 56% and 28%, either share the labor at home with their partners or they perceive to be taking the most responsibility. For the female, almost 100% actually either share equally with their partners or take the most responsibility. And what this means is that while Generation Y women are more committed and less likely to turn over in the workplace, when it comes to their responsibilities outside of the workplace, they're actually having to do more. And if companies are wanting to actually keep these women into the workplace, then they really need to actually provide flexible work arrangements. And our research also shows, we've got some preliminary data that shows providing flexible work arrangements indeed affect the commitment of Generation Y employees. So this is another study that I had done in collaboration with JobStreet. It's been a number of years ago. But what we had asked here is that we had a survey on benefits. And we asked respondents, okay, whether or not they want to have this particular benefit with regards to flexible work arrangements. So we asked them 3 types: flexible hours, reduced work week, and work from home. And if they want this particular benefit, flexible work arrangement, and it is made available to them, what is their level of commitment? Versus if they actually want to have this benefit and it's not made available to them, what is their level of commitment? So what we see here is that we had 294 respondents who said, yes, I want to have flexible hours. And this is the makeup in terms of men and women. And then this is the commitment level that they have, okay? If I like flexible work hours and it is made available to me. So about half of the respondents said they like flexible hours and it was actually made available to them. And for the men, their commitment level was at 4.17. For the women, it was 4.0. Versus they wanted to have flexible hours, but it was not made available to them. And this is that column right here. So what we see is that for the men, if they wanted it, but it's not made available to them, their commitment level is actually lower to 3.62. For women, it was 3.44. So in essence, there's actually a difference, an improvement for the commitment levels of those who wanted flexible hours and it was made available to them versus to those who wanted it and it was not made available to them. It was roughly the same for men and women in terms of the improvement, 0.55 versus 0.56 for women on their higher commitment levels. On the reduced work week, 264, slightly lower respondents said they wanted to have that. And even less respondents said it was made available to them. And 205, or almost more than the majority, actually, it was not made available to them. But notice for the women on the reduced work week, if it was made available to them and they actually wanted to have it, their commitment actually improves by 0.58 compared to the men's commitment, which only improved by 0.20. Now, in terms of work from home, a number of them actually also wanted to have work from home, but only 70 of them said it was made available to them, and the rest, it was not made available to them. And for the men, there was not an improvement in their commitment, whether or not it was made available to them or not, the work from home. But for the women, there was still a slight benefit. And what this actually shows us is that providing flexible work arrangements is an effective way of attracting women into the workplace and keeping them, or potentially getting them committed to the organization. And so for those organizations that want to have business growth and also diversity in their management teams, or at least in their workplace in general, if they are male dominated, then providing flexible work arrangements is definitely one of the tools that they need to seriously consider. As we strengthen our efforts in promoting women empowerment and gender inclusivity in the workplace, we would like to invite you to join us this May in our Gender Inclusivity in the Workplace and Business programs. This is in coordination with UN Women and We Empower Asia, together with the AIM School of Executive Education and Lifelong Learning.